when I used to hang out with you in, I guess, late teens, early 20s, you and me and maybe some of our other friends, you would always be trying to get us to watch some like really crazy horror film, and I would be like, no, man, I'm not into this horror stuff, and sometimes you would succeed and sometimes you wouldn't. But I remember one occasion where maybe in our mid 24, 25, where we were with you and the Dusk Whales.
Yeah, there was just like a rebellion.
Well, yes, but I remember that we started watching something, and even you were like, "Wait a minute! Like, I haven't seen this in a while. This is like too messed up."
No, the instance I was thinking of was on another occasion where it was like I just kept pressing, like, "No, just this is the worst part. If we just get through this," and then it got like even worse. It was like, "No, it gets better. Trust me." And like at a certain point, everybody was just like, "No way, we're not having this. We're out."
Right.
Yeah. No, I've purged my horror library on several occasions, including very recently. So like I think just like a month or two ago, I went through again. Not that I have like a ton of horror films anymore, but there were like some leftovers, like some films that I just really got a kick out of when I was a teenager, and you take another look at them and it's like, but so maybe it's worth me saying like what I do appreciate about horror. Cause the first show that I was ever in was a horror show, actually. Way back when I first started acting, I did this show in DC it was at this great old spot called the Playbill.
I remember this. I don't think I made it, but are you talking about the Bloody Banquet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the show was at this great tavern. It was like this old theater haunt called the Playbill, and they had a little black box theater in the back. We did our costume changes in the kitchen of the restaurant. So you're like changing costumes, and like waiters are coming through with like orders. Anyway, it was this little hole in the wall, and we did this horror show. I had to like go into this full face prosthetic. For most of the show, I was wearing a mask, and then I would do this reveal that would show just like how disfigured my face had become.
Right. That's cool.
And I've always loved that aspect of horror, the sort of like magic trick aspect to it, where you're grossing people out, you're scaring them with like blood packets that are hidden under your arm, or like a fake limb that's like stuffed into your shirt. There's something that I really appreciate about the craft of like of pretend violence and of terrifying scenes. And I think that's evident. Like I think that's at work. It's operating in this film, in Nosferatu, because that's probably the thing that's most terrifying about it. I don't think you can say that like the story is like particularly chilling, at least as it's presented, or that there's like an atmosphere of dread, but it's the imagery and it's the sort of magic trick that of the magic tricks that are executed on screen with Nosferatu like disappearing into thin air, or
right.
Him like with superhuman strength like carrying these coffins and then getting into one and the coffin magically closing, doors magically opening, and then of course like his prosthetics and his makeup, the teeth,
his hands,
the hands, and how he carries himself, right? These are all like images that are just straight out of a nightmare.
Yeah. How do you think horror functions? Like what or not how do you think it functions, but what do you think its function is?
Yeah. I think that it's similar to how Aristotle describes tragedy, as like achieving this
purgative
thing. Yeah, like the catharsis or whatever. So this is one of the other things that always attracted me about horror, is that on my day-to-day, especially when I was in high school, you might feel any number of intense emotions, when you're a teenager, whether it's like excitement or romance or whatever, but horror, not so much. And there was something delightful in the same way like a roller coaster is exciting, you're putting yourself into this totally artificial environment that's sort of crafted to deliver this thrill, of like this danger, these death-defying stunts that you're put through on a roller coaster that you would never experience under any other context. And if you did, like if you were in a car accident or something, it would be like deadly terrifying, if not traumatic, Right. And I think similarly with horror films, like what's always been appealing to me is that I can feel that feeling, of just being scared, but know that I'm safe, that there isn't actually anything that is scary. Hopefully, right? That there isn't anything that is actually traumatizing. But I will say, that I've seen some horror films that I wish I could forget, So that's where it's tricky, because I think that with film there is a real potential to traumatize with the kind of imagery that you show, especially when it gets into pornographic imagery, which is something that is definitely used a lot in horror. It's kind of a commonplace, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point about like the use of imagery that can traumatize, because there's like a number of different aspects to it, right? So there's the aspect of the demonic and the occult, which we could discuss. There's aspects of like, and then in terms of like violence or just disturbing things, there's also an aspect of like, first of all, what you're showing and kind of like its intrinsic qualities and like how it treats its subject matter, and then also the effect that it has on the viewer. And the two, I think maybe sometimes people make too much of an effort to separate those two things. But they are distinct, I think.
I've run myself in circles, like trying to get my head around this so many times before, to try to come up with like some clear principles. And there are some, certainly anything that's pornographic is just out the window.
Right.
But even there, there are instances of nudity in film that aren't, right? So there is aren't pornographic, I should say. So, so there is there does have to be, I think, a consultation of the spirit of the film, There has to be a kind of prudential discernment of what's going on. So in the case of occult subject matter, in general, I like to stay away from things that have to do with the occult, especially if they're kind of flippant treatments.
Right.
So what really bothers me is the closer a film gets to the pretense of like a real demon or a real portrayal of the occult.
Yeah. And yet the spirit underlying it is still flippant somehow.
Exactly. Yeah. So
that's your objection to Ari Aster, essentially. Isn't it?
Right. So you sent me this interesting article
by Sohrab Ahmari. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he's a relatively recent Catholic convert. He writes for the New York Post. Has a book or two out,
and he has a lot of great stuff to say about the arts. I appreciate his voice, as he's not a Philistine, but he's also clearly a faithful man. And he has this interesting article on Ari Aster's work where he kind of vindicates it as, pointing out this particular decline in Western culture of the father.
Yeah. And we're just for people who don't know who that is, Ari Aster. The recent films, he's only done 2 films.
I think so.
Hereditary, and then Midsommar, which both are from A24 Studios, I think. That's made a lot of these kind of modern, more artsy seeming horror films in the past few years.
Yeah. So his films are very violent, and both of them deal with aspects of the occult. Right. And where Ari Aster would find a warning and a cautionary tale in both of these films about the direction that our culture is heading in its sort of re-paganization and its resentment toward the father, I find a celebration of those things.
You mean where Sohrab Ahmari would find those?
Sorry, my bad. Yeah. That's basically what Sohrab Ahmari says about Ari Aster's work, in a kind of an effort to vindicate it.
Right.
But I think that if you really are sort of alert to the spirit that's driving these films, it strikes me not as one that's like cautionary and giving a sort of due reverence. Again, if you can even use that word in talking about this material, but sort of like a due seriousness or gravity, a soberness, in dealing with this.
It's like when people say like, oh, there's pornography out there that like respects women and like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, so like The Exorcist, there's no question that evil is evil, and good is good. But with Ari Aster's films, it's a little... Those distinctions are a little blurry, I think. So
maybe especially because it has... I haven't seen that, but from what I understand, people have take a political kind of cultural criticism undercurrent to them that makes some of these things ambiguous.
Yeah, another interesting recent horror film, if we can just talk about it before getting into Nosferatu, is The Witch. A New England folktale. Did you see that one?
I'll probably never watch it. It looks too scary, but plenty of people I trust say that it was really good and substantive.
It is very scary, and again, dealing with sort of New England folklore surrounding witches, and really, really kind of presenting just how terrifying this image was to this early American community.
Right.
I think that there is like a due reverence granted there, and so you can watch that film in good faith, I think, and not get confused. And yet, even there, a lot of people coming out of that film sort of applauded it as like a celebration of witchcraft or a sort of new feminist kind of narrative. And I thought, like, wow, that's a really scary response, first off, but also one that I don't think is totally justified by the film, because I think that for anybody who's seen it, like, it's quite tragic.
Sometimes feminists will, like, take the villain and be like,
the
villain of this film is a feminist hero.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well,
it's weird.
Yeah, you gotta wonder.